Marvel Rivals is the newest PvP shooter game that's out on Steam and Epic Games, and has drawn in tons of different players from tons of different games. But some of the players have complained about how broken some of the characters are in the game, like Hawkeye and Hela. So I decided to make a video outlining how Marvel Rivals should change each character in a small way in order to make the characters more balanced and make the game more balanced as a whole. And if you want to jump around the video to characters that you're interested in or characters that you play, I'm going to leave timestamps on the video so you can just jump around. And one last thing before I start, I stream Marvel Rivals almost every day at twitch.tv/Chupacabra, so if you could, I'd greatly appreciate it if you stopped by and said you're from this video. And now with all that being said, let's go ahead and just hop into the changes. For the list of characters, I'll just go down the line of characters from A to Z, and there will also be timestamps on the video for you to jump around. So starting with Adam Warlock, his primary fire is called Quantum Magic. It is a single fire weapon dealing 55 per shot, and his secondary is a Cosmic Cluster, which can charge and will do 38 per bullet. His first ability is a heal pack that goes from character to character, healing 95 per person that it hits, and then 35 to himself. That's on a 6-second cooldown with 2 charges. His second ability is called Soul Bond, which will share all damage taken with Adam and will break once Adam dies, which will also keep him at 1 HP instead of dying. This also has a 30-second cooldown. His passive is called Regenerative Cocoon, which allows him to revive himself once every 105 seconds. And also his team-up ability is the same thing that he gives to Star-Lord and Mantis, so they can use the same ability. And finally, his ultimate will res anybody on his team that's in the area of the ult. I think that the best change for Adam Warlock would be just to give him another healing pack and up the cooldown by like a second or two, because this will give him a good buff to his healing, which he could definitely use, but it still will keep him from being too broken by adding a couple seconds to the cooldown. The next character I'll talk about is Black Panther. Black Panther has an interesting kit and is also one of the hardest characters to play, but he also is not a very strong character no matter what rank you're playing in. His primary fire is called Vibranium Claws, which is a melee weapon that does 35 damage per hit with a 0.44 second fire rate. His first ability is called the Spear Toss. It's a projectile doing 45 damage per direct hit and has 2 charges and a 6-second cooldown. The next ability is a Spinning Kick, which sends you forward doing 70 damage per player hit and has an 8-second cooldown. And finally, his last ability is a Dash that will do 80 damage to everyone it hits and sends you forward on an 8-second cooldown as well. But the Spinning Kick and the Spear will also attach a Vibranium mark to the enemy, and if you dash into them, your dash cooldown will reset after you hit them. And the change that I'd probably make for Black Panther is to lower his cooldowns for his dash and Spinning Kick, because the cooldown's way too long right now. Because if you miss your dash, you're waiting a whole 8 seconds just before you can go back into the fight, and while you're just sitting there, you can't really do anything as Black Panther. But then again, lowering the cooldown too much could also cause Black Panther to get too strong and be broken because of how long he can dash around in fights without having to go out. But by lowering it by only 1 and 2 seconds, could definitely help Black Panther become more viable, but he also won't be too broken. Black Widow is next, and she is one of the weakest characters in the game right now. Her primary fire is a hit scan sniper rifle, does 120 to the body, and has a fire rate of 0.83 shots per second. And she also has a secondary that is a melee weapon. Her first ability is called Fleet Foot. It is a tactical sprint, and you can jump higher during it. And the other ability is a kick that will knock back the enemy and do 35 damage to each one that it hits. And even though Black Widow could use quite a few changes, I think the best change to use for her is to increase her fire rate, because when you look at the other snipers in the game, like Hawkeye and Hela, they are much stronger than her. Mainly because you have like Hawkeye, who can one-shot any character when Black Widow can't. Also Hela, who does tons of damage, but has such a fast fire rate. And now we're going to go quickly through the next couple of characters, starting with Captain America. Captain America is a melee Vanguard. He's kind of the middle of the pack for Vanguard characters. And although he doesn't do much damage, he's great at getting into the other team's backline and disturbing the healers, and then getting back out. I think the best change for him would probably be to either slightly buff his damage, or give his shield a little bit more health because he is already a decent tank, and you don't want to turn him into a broken tank. Next, Cloak and Dagger, who is probably the most unique character in the game, with one form being mainly healing, and the other side being damage. Cloak and Dagger is probably the 3rd best healer in the game right now, and it's because of her output of healing that she can do. With that being said though, the change I would make for her is probably to just slightly nerf her primary fire healing. Her abilities are still, I think, pretty good. You can stay the way they are, but I think her primary fire is what needs to be nerfed. Next is Doctor Strange, who is known as the best and most broken Vanguard in the game, and with Hulk, he is even stronger. But one way to change Strange to make him less broken is just by nerfing the amount of damage that his Maelstrom of Madness ability can do, the E ability for keyboard and mouse, because that ability is probably his best in his kit. Groot is the next character, and he's another Vanguard, but it's kind of in the middle of the pack, just like Captain America was. It really depends on the comps if he's really good or really not great. Really one good change I think they could make for Groot is probably just to add range to his primary fire, or maybe potentially adding some health to his smaller shields. Next we probably have possibly one of the most broken characters in the game, who is Hawkeye. He's banned in almost all the ranked games that you can play, for Diamond and above, and that is really mainly because of his potential to one-shot characters in a game that is so filled with healing, and people have so much healing that they can do. And by far the best change for Hawkeye is to just nerf his damage, at least to a point where he can't one-shot characters, because it's so broken in a game where there's so much healing, you should not be able to one-shot characters with your primary fire. And even if this means you have to buff his abilities so that he's not completely useless, having a one-shot in the game is too broken, so he needs to be nerfed in that way at least. That being said though, the other character that is constantly getting banned and is also one of the most broken characters in the game is Hela. She could definitely be the most broken character in the game with her high damage output and also with her fast firing rate. And I think the best change for Hela would be to just lower her damage output. Her firing rate I think is fine, you can leave it as it is, but just lowering her damage would help a lot. And then we have a pretty weird one, which is Hulk, who at release of the game people thought was maybe one of the worst tanks in the game, but recently has been seen as a very strong character, particularly because of his team-ups with Iron Man and Strange. My best change for this character in my opinion would be to just nerf the team-up with both Iron Man and Strange, rather than changing something about his own kit, because I think his kit in general is pretty good, pretty balanced, but I think just the team-up with Strange and Iron Man is too good. Alright, the next character on the list is Iron Fist, who is a unique character that is kind of hard to tell where he sits in the character list, because he can wreck lower ranks, but when you get to higher ranks, you know how to play against him, just using stuns and stuff when he dives the backline. But probably the change I'd make for Iron Fist is either to buff his damage or buff his health, but don't do both, just so that he can dive the backline a little bit better, even with the stuns. Iron Man is another one of those characters who people thought was not a very strong character at the game's release, but with people realizing how strong Hulk team-up is, he has been seen as a much better character since then. And I think the best change for Iron Man would either be to buff his health or buff his primary fire, and then nerf the Hulk team-up as well. Alright, now let's talk about one of the most loved characters in the game, who is Jeff the Landshark. His primary fire is a healing beam that does 140 healing per second with 100 ammo and 20 rounds per second. And his secondary fire is a damaging shot, doing 25 direct damage with 45 splash damage. His first ability is called Hide and Seek, which puts him in the ground, makes him move faster, and makes him harder to hit. And his other ability is a healing bubble that heals 85 on a 6-second cooldown. But I think the change that I'd make for Jeff is probably to make it so his ammo depletes a lot slower for his healing, or just give him some more ammo to make it last longer. Next is Loki, who's a pretty confusing character on whether he's a good character or a bad character, because some people say he's not strong enough, and some say he's decent and good. But really they still know that he's not anywhere near Mantis and Luna Snow level. Even with those other healers being stronger than him, his kit is still very strong, with an ult that he can copy any person in the match, and then you get an instant ult with that character. His decoys can also be very strong if used in the right way, and his regeneration domain ability is possibly his strongest ability in his kit, because he can convert the damage taken into healing. But the change that I'd probably make for Loki is to slightly nerf his regeneration ability, but to also buff his primary fire, which is kind of holding him back right now. The next character is the healer that can probably do the most healing in the game, and that's Luna Snow. Luna Snow's primary fire is a hit scan that does 69 healing if it hits a teammate, but does 60 damage if it hits enemies. Her first ability is a stun ability that is a projectile that will freeze the enemy it hits, and her other ability is called the Ice Arts, which lasts for 6 seconds and turns her primary fire into a beam that will deal 50 damage to enemies and heal 89 to her teammates. But the best part about her kit is her ultimate that can toggle between healing and damage boost. The healing can now heal almost every ult in the game that's not one shot, which is why it makes her so broken. But the change that I would make first to her kit is probably to make it a 1-second delay between switching from damage and going back from healing. Because there's a lot of people that'll spam it back and forth, which will give you both the effects of the healing and also give you the damage boost. Or the other change you can make is just lowering her primary fire healing, because it's a little bit too much right now. The next character is another confusing one, and that is Magik. Magik is a melee character that can do a lot of damage if it's played correctly, but yet she's still not one of the best characters. And the main reason that I feel like Magik isn't strong is because of her slow fire rate. Because even though she seems so hard to kill with her health that she gains back, and her phasing ability, she still seems like you can focus her and kill her pretty quickly, especially with stuns. And even though a good Magik can destroy lower elo games, once you get higher, she's really hard to play, and you can't really destroy even if you're good at Magik. With that being said though, the change I'd make is just very simple, and that's just increase her fire rate. And next we go back to the Vanguard role with Magneto. Magneto is an interesting character because he's a very strong tank, but he kind of gets left in the dust by Strange, and now also Hulk. But even with that, his shield is great with his ability to take all the damage that he wants and he can still live during a certain amount of time, and also his bubble ability where he can shield one of his teammates or himself. However, I think the change that he can make is slightly lowering the amount of damage his primary fire does, but then also buffing the damage potential for his ult. And also I think Magneto will just get better if Scarlett Witch gets better because of their team up, but we'll see. And now it's time for the second best healer in the game behind Luna Snow, and that is Mantis. Mantis is a great character because she can damage boost her teammates, or she can also heal their teammates. She also has a stun ability that if it hits it will put the enemy to sleep for 3.5 seconds unless they are woken up or broken out by their team. And also her ult is a lot like Luna's ult, where it can do fast healing and will give your team shields, but instead of being able to damage boost, she can still shoot and also use abilities while she's in her ult. And I think the best change for Mantis would be to nerf the amount of healing that she does and also nerf the amount of damage boost that she gives. But next we have Moon Knight, who is another middle of the pack DPS, where he isn't broken but he's still playable. His primary fire is a burst projectile, doing 25 per bullet, that will bounce off enemies and go up to hit other enemies of up to 3 times. He also has a 6-second cooldown for his secondary fire, that is a larger bullet of his first, and will do 80 damage and can also bounce off 3 enemies. But his best ability is his Ancient Unk ability, that will throw a projectile on the ground, and whatever you shoot at the object will bounce off and redirect to enemies in the area. So the change I think they should make to Moon Knight is probably to buff the radius of his ult, but also nerf his Unk ability, because I feel like it's a little too broken to just be able to throw your primary fire at a thing and it just redirects for free. Alright, now next is Namor. You don't see a lot of in the lower ranks, but at the higher ranks you start to see more and more of him. And his primary fire is probably the most unique in the game, where he'll throw spears that will do 70 damage per hit, and he can throw for 1.09 spears per second, and he has infinite ammo. But if he can hit an enemy, it will lower his Aquatic Dominion cooldown, and if you hit a headshot, it will increase your attack speed. His main ability is being able to place down squids that will act as turrets, and will shoot the other team. It has 2 charges, unless you have a team up with Luna Snow, in which case you'll get another squid, that is a snow squid, ice squid, or whatever you want to call it, and will do extra damage and have extra health. His ultimate is an AoE ultimate that does damage in that little circle, and will do 500 damage in the middle, and on the outsides do 200, and it'll also stun all the enemies that it hits. And the change that I'd probably make for this character is by nerfing the squids a little bit, not by their damage, but just by lowering their health. Next is a character that can sometimes be very annoying, and that is Peni Parker, when she stacks up 6 mines on the door. Peni is another Vanguard, who is a great tank, but mainly for playing defense, and has a primary fire that does 30 damage for each bullet and cannot headshot. But the best part about Peni is her abilities. She has a minefield that she can place down, and it will start making mines in a certain area, that as the enemy walks into the area, the mines will lock on and go after them. She also has another ability that's just mines that she can have placed down, and she has 4 charges, and they will go up to 16 mines at one time. And her final ability is a stun, and it kind of shoots out like a spider web, and it'll stun them for like 1.5 seconds. And I think the change that will be best for Peni is to slightly nerf her mines, but also to buff her primary fire so she's more viable on offense. The next character is another high-tier DPS character, and that's Psylocke. Psylocke is a great dive character that has a strong primary fire that shoots kind of like a shotgun pattern that'll do 30 damage per bullet that it hits. Her abilities are really good, and they're great for her kit, which is one is a dash that'll do a little bit of damage if it hits someone, and it has 2 charges, and her other ability will make her go invisible for like 3 seconds. And her ult's another great part of her kit, where it creates a circle that can move around in any direction very slowly, and she'll dash from enemy to enemy inside the area, doing 150 damage per hit. The best change for this character will just be slightly lowering her primary fire damage. It's probably a little too high right now, and that'll just make her more balanced and make her still good. The next character up is Punisher, who has a hit scan AR, and his secondary gun is a shotgun with 8 ammo. His first ability is a turret that'll keep him in place, and he's able to shoot 200 ammo before it's automatically destroyed, or the enemy team can also kill the turret, or if they get behind him, they can kill him from behind. He also has a zipline ability that he can place up to 3 at one time, and his other ability is a smoke screen that'll move him backwards slightly. His ult is also very strong because he gains a little bit of extra health. He has 2 turrets in his hands that do a lot of damage for whoever he's shooting at, and he also has a turret on his back that'll shoot missiles that will lock onto enemies. And the change I would probably make for this character is to slightly nerf his turret by lowering the amount of health that it has so it's easier to destroy for the enemy team. Racoon is the last strategist on this list that I'm going to talk about, and he's one of the weaker strategist characters compared to the others. His primary fire gun is a gun that will shoot out bullets that don't do a lot of damage, but his secondary fire also shoots out orbs that will heal his teammates. However, he does have some very strong abilities, with one that will place down a res ability that will also drop armor packs for his teammates to grab. He also has a boost ability with 2 charges that will send him in any direction he's looking. And then finally he has a team up ability with Punisher and Bucky that will give those characters a pylon that he can throw down, and if they're in the radius they'll have infinite ammo and also faster firing. So even though he has some really good abilities, the overall character is let down by his primary fire and also his secondary fire. So the change I'd make is to buff the amount of healing that he can do, and also probably slightly buff the amount of damage that his primary fire can do. Because really, if you're playing Rocket, you're almost never doing damage, you're almost always just healing. Next is Scarlett Witch, who was a character who seemed like a really good character during the beta, but on release of the game, she has not been a great character. Her primary fire is a beam that locks onto targets, and her secondary fire is a projectile that she throws out that will do splash damage. And her abilities are a fade ability that makes her immune to any damage coming in, and an orb that she can send out that will stun anybody that's in the area. And I honestly think the best change for her would just be to slightly buff her primary fire and secondary fire's damage. Squirrel Girl is next on the list, and her primary fire is a lot like Junkrat's in Overwatch, with a gun that shoots out grenades in a similar trajectory as Junkrat. She's pretty middle of the pack for damage characters, probably even on the lesser side of that, but she can still do big damage, and she has some pretty good abilities as well. With her abilities being an acorn that she can throw out and whoever hits it stuns, a jump ability that sends her high in the air, an ability that will give one of those 2 cooldowns back, and finally her team up ability with Spider-Man that just gives her another stun. I think the biggest downfall to her kit is her ultimate ability, because the game has so many strong abilities for ultimates, but compared to them, her ult is not very good. So the change I'd probably make to her would be slightly buffing the damage that her ult can do, and maybe make it last a little bit longer. Now we will finish off by going fast through the next couple, starting with Spider-Man. Spider-Man is one of the most unique kits in the game, but is also very hard to learn. But in the beta, he was one of the strongest characters, and now he's kind of fallen off to sort of the middle of the pack. So the change that could probably help him the most is one of 2 things. Either buff his primary fire damage, or lowering his ability cooldowns. Next is Star-Lord, who has a pretty cool and simple kit, and is great at diving the backlines, but still is another just alright damage character. But the best change to help him would just be to buff his primary fire, because his abilities are really good. I think they can stay the same because they fit his playstyle really well. Next is Storm, who is definitely seen as possibly the worst DPS in the game, but much like Iron Man, she has been seen as a much stronger character, going from a D tier character to around a B tier character. I think the best change for Storm though would be to buff her primary fire damage, because right now she kind of feels more like a strategist than she does a duelist character. Now we get into Thor, who sits in the middle of the pack for Vanguard characters, and I think his change would be pretty simple, and that it's just going to be a buff his primary fire damage a little bit. But the other possible change for him would be to buff how fast he gets his hammers back instead of buffing his primary fire. Next we have another Vanguard, and also the last Vanguard, and that is Venom. And Venom might be the worst tank in the game right now, because he can get focused so easily when he dives and he can't really do much about it. So the change for Venom would probably be to lower his cooldown times so that he can get in and out much easier, and that he doesn't just go in, get focused, and die. Next is another top damage character, and that is Winter Soldier. Winter Soldier has a very strong kit, with his primary fire doing a lot of damage, and his ability to hook people in and then punch them even deeper into his team. But the best change, I think, for Bucky would be to leave his primary fire alone and his hook alone, and instead focus on his ult, and either make it do less damage or make it a shorter time period to get his ultimate back from killing someone. And the final character I'm going to talk about is Wolverine, who's another interesting character because he can be played at the higher ranks if you know how to play him, but even then, in some games he just seems completely useless. His damage to tanks is a great and unique part about his kit, but I think for Wolverine to get him more viable, I think probably slightly buffing his damage when he's going against the lower health targets would definitely help him make him a more viable character. And those are all the changes that I make for these Marvel Rivals characters. Obviously there's more, but I think this is a good starting point to get the game more balanced. I want to know what changes you think should be added to the game. I also want to know where did I go wrong, so go ahead and comment down below what you think. And one last plug to come check out my Twitch at twitch.tv/Chubacaro. And also to not forget to like and subscribe for more Marvel Rivals content on this channel, and I greatly appreciate it. And thank you all for watching.